She walks into the room, and instantly the air changes. Her beauty is undeniable, but it is not the kind of beauty that softens the soul. It is the sharpened edge of desire, honed by countless encounters, practiced gazes, and 1,000 subtle rehearsals. Men orbit her unconsciously, pulled in by an invisible gravity they cannot name. To them, she is a mystery. To her, they are predictable notes in a song she has played too many times to misstep. And yet, they do not see it. They never notice the repetition, never perceive the hidden ledger of her past, the accumulation of histories that shape her every smile, every touch, every calculated silence. Why do they not notice? Why do men who pride themselves on logic, who boast about strategy, become blind when faced with a woman who has been tempered by many men before them? The answer is brutal, and it is old. Machiavelli saw it in the palace intrigues of Florence, and though he wrote of princes, states, and power, his lessons cut deeper into the hidden theater of love than most dare admit. His thesis is simple. Men do not see because they do not want to see. And yet, this blindness cost them everything. Machiavelli's world was not one of sentiment, but of survival. He knew that appearances rule perception, and perception rules destiny. He wrote that it is not necessary for a prince to be truly virtuous. It is only necessary that he appear so. The same applies in the feminine theater. A woman does not need to be untouched, pure, or singular in her devotion. She only needs to appear as such to the man who wishes desperately to believe it. This is the crux of the brutal truth. Women with many men are masters of appearing unmarked, and men, in their hunger, choose to be deceived. But why? Because men mistake their desire for insight. They believe that attraction itself is proof of authenticity. They confuse the fire in their veins with the certainty of discovery, when in truth, they are only consuming the image she projects. This blindness is not an accident. It is a feature of human psychology, and Machiavelli understood it long before modern men wrote books on dating. Let us unravel this single concept. Imagine a battlefield. On one side, the idealized woman a man imagines he has found, innocent, different, somehow untouched by the cynicism of the world. On the other side, the reality, a woman who has been sculpted by countless romantic encounters, who has seen strategies rise and collapse, who knows exactly how to feed a man's ego until he is pliable. Who wins this battle? Always the one who understands appearances? Always the one who conceals reality behind performance? Machiavelli wrote that men in power must learn to be both lion and fox, the lion to frighten wolves, the fox to recognize traps. But most men in romance are neither. They are prey. They walk into traps willingly, because they cannot bear the thought of questioning the image they desire. The brutal truth is not that women are deceptive. The brutal truth is that men choose comfort over clarity. And here lies the paradox. A man will notice if another man cheats him in business. He will notice if another man disrespects him in public. But he will not notice when a woman before him carries the imprint of countless others. Why? Because to notice is to destroy the fantasy. To notice is to accept that he is not the only one, that his specialness is an illusion. Men cling to the illusion because it soothes their pride. It elevates their passion. It makes them feel like the hero of a story rather than the latest chapter in an endless novel. Machiavelli would laugh, not cruelly, but knowingly. He would remind us that men are weak not in reason but in appetite, and it is appetite that blinds. But this blindness has consequences. A man who cannot see is a man who cannot govern himself. A man who cannot govern himself is at the mercy of others. And so, the same principle that Machiavelli applied to princes holds true for men in love. Control begins with perception. To see the world as it is, rather than as one wishes it to be, is the first and greatest act of power. And this, my brothers, is the thesis we must face with merciless clarity. Women with many men are not invisible to the trained eye. They are only invisible to those who have not yet trained their eyes. But how does one begin to see? How does one break the spell of appearances and pierce through the veils of performance? This is where Machiavelli's philosophy becomes not just political, but existential. For if a man cannot master the appearances of those around him, he will forever remain a pawn in their games. The woman who has mastered performance will play him as she has played countless others. And the man who refuses to notice will call it love, even as he is undone. But pause here. Reflect. Ask yourself this. Is the blindness inevitable? Is every man doomed to walk into the theater of appearances with his eyes closed? Or is there a path, hidden yet accessible, for those who dare to see the world as Machiavelli saw it, cold, unsentimental, but profoundly real? The answer to that question determines not just the fate of your relationships, but the sovereignty of your soul. For the battlefield of appearances is not only about women. It is about the very essence of what it means to be a man who refuses illusion and chooses power instead. And yet, before we move further, let us anchor ourselves in the truth revealed so far. Men do not notice, because they prefer the comfort of illusion to the brutality of reality. But now, the question sharpens like a blade. What happens when a man finally chooses to notice? What happens when he rips the veil away? The answer is more dangerous than you imagine. When a man begins to notice, the world he thought he knew collapses. The smile that once seemed radiant now reveals a pattern. The gestures that once felt spontaneous now echo with practice. The words that once intoxicated now ring hollow, as if borrowed from a script delivered countless times before. This is the first stage of awakening, and it is brutal. For in that moment, the man realizes he was not unique. He was not chosen for some ineffable spark of destiny. He was merely the next in line, another audience for a performance perfected over years of repetition. The ground beneath him shakes, because he sees that what he mistook for intimacy was only theater. But this collapse is necessary, for Machiavelli teaches us that no true power can be built on illusion. To govern a state, a prince must strip away sentiment and face the realities of war, treachery, and shifting alliances. To govern himself, a man must strip away the sentimental lies that shield him from reality. He must see that a woman who has been shaped by many men carries with her not just experiences, but strategies. She knows how to command attention, how to feed an ego, how to present the illusion of depth without exposing the truth of her repetition. This is not evil. It is survival. It is the fox's craft in human form. And the man who remains blind to this is not her victim. He is her willing participant. The common response to such awakening is despair. A man notices, and suddenly he collapses inward. He feels betrayed, hollowed, even mocked by fate. He asks why the world is not as he dreamed it. He longs for innocence that cannot be reclaimed, for purity that never existed in the form he imagined. And in that longing, he weakens. He grows bitter, or worse, he grows cynical without becoming wise. This collapse is predictable, and it is precisely why most men prefer not to notice. They would rather remain enchanted than face the wound of disillusionment. But notice this carefully. Despair is not the end. It is the test. The power response comes only when a man, having seen the illusion, does not collapse, but rises above it. He accepts that the world is not designed to soothe his fantasies, but to challenge his strength. He accepts that women, like men, are shaped by history, by practice, by strategy. And rather than demand innocence, he demands sovereignty. He chooses not to be undone by appearances, but to master them. He studies the performance until it becomes transparent. He no longer fears the knowledge of her past, because he is no longer defined by it. He does not ask whether he is unique. He asks whether he can maintain clarity while others drown in fantasy. This is the Machiavellian man, the one who refuses to be deceived, not by others and not by himself. The perception shift that follows is profound. Suddenly, What once seemed romantic is revealed as tactical. The laughter that once disarmed him becomes a tool of rapport. The glance that once intoxicated him becomes a lever of control. He no longer sees a goddess to be worshipped, but a strategist to be understood. And in that understanding, he gains freedom. Freedom not from women, but from his own blindness. Freedom from the cycle of enchantment and collapse that governs weaker men. He sees the stage, he sees the actors, and he sees himself not as a victim of the play, but as a director who can step off the stage at will. Here we arrive at a dangerous truth. Most men cannot bear this clarity. They cling to illusions because illusions are warm, seductive, and easy to believe. Reality is cold, unsentimental, and merciless. But Machiavelli did not write for those who seek comfort. He wrote for those who seek power. And power begins with the courage to see without flinching. A man who notices the patterns of women who have been with many men does not hate them, nor does he worship them. He understands them, and in understanding, he reclaims his throne. So let me ask you, what is more dangerous, the man who remains blind, content in fantasy, or the man who sees clearly and acts with precision? The blind man may feel joy for a time, but he is always at risk of collapse when the veil slips. The clear-sighted man may bear the weight of solitude, but he walks with sovereignty. Which life do you choose? And before we continue, hold this truth close. Awakening begins with noticing, but noticing alone is not enough. The stakes rise here. For the question now is not whether you can see through illusions, but whether you can wield that vision in the brutal theater of modern desire. Are you ready to step into that arena, where clarity is both a weapon and a curse? In the brutal theater of modern desire, the law of appearances rules with the same iron grip it did in Machiavelli's Florence. Social media amplifies this reality. Every image is curated, every angle calculated, every smile rehearsed until it drips with effortless allure. Men scroll endlessly, hypnotized, never asking themselves how many times that same pose has been offered to countless others. They do not notice because they are not trained to notice. And even when suspicion stirs, they silence it with hope, with a desperate hunger to believe they are seeing something authentic. But authenticity in this domain is a mirage. What they see is strategy dressed as sincerity. And Machiavelli would say, the man who cannot distinguish between the mask and the face is already defeated. The common response to this theater is submission. Men surrender their judgment. They chase, they flatter, they compete in the endless coliseum of likes and comments, convinced that their attention is valuable when in truth it is disposable. They do not realize they are one of thousands, each thinking himself special, each failing to see the machinery at work. And when their efforts are discarded, when their devotion is met with indifference, they call it betrayal. But it was not betrayal. It was blindness. They walked into the trap with open eyes and chose not to see the bait for what it was. This is the collapse of the untrained man. His desire betrays him. His hope betrays him. His refusal to notice betrays him. But there is another response, one few men ever reach. The power response is withdrawal of naive investment. Not withdrawal from women, but withdrawal from delusion. The Machiavellian man does not compete for scraps of validation. He does not chase shadows. Instead, he reclaims his attention as his most valuable currency. He studies appearances not as a believer, but as a strategist. He asks, what is this image designed to provoke? What weakness in me is it attempting to exploit? And once he sees it, the spell breaks. He is no longer another man in orbit, but a sovereign observing from above. This detachment does not make him bitter, it makes him dangerous. For now he chooses when to engage, how to engage, and whether the game is even worth his presence. The perception shift here is seismic. Most men see women with many men, and either glorify them as untouchable goddesses or condemn them as irreparably ruined. Both views are illusions. The Machiavellian man sees neither goddess nor ruin. He sees an operator of appearances. He sees a human being sharpened by repetition, a strategist who knows how to wield attention like a weapon. And in seeing this, he is free from both worship and disdain. He does not chase. He does not collapse. He navigates. He chooses. His clarity makes him immune to the spell that enslaves lesser men. But pause. Ask yourself this. If clarity is so powerful, why do so few men attain it? Why do they choose blindness, even when the patterns repeat, even when the pain is predictable? The answer is merciless, because blindness is easier, because fantasy feels better than truth, because to see clearly requires the death of the ego that longs to be special. Most men would rather believe the lie and suffer later than confront reality now. That is why they never notice. That is why they remain trapped. And so we arrive at a fork in the road. On one path, you continue as before, enchanted, deceived, a pawn in someone else's theater. On the other path, you take the vision Machiavelli offered and carve it into your soul. You refuse illusions, even when they tempt you with sweetness. You choose clarity, even when it cuts. And in that choice, you transform. You become a man who cannot be played, a man who cannot be undone by repetition, a man who governs himself as ruthlessly as a prince governs his state. But here is the dangerous promise. Clarity does not free you from desire. It intensifies it. Once you see through appearances, you hunger not for fantasy, but for reality. You crave not the mask, but the essence. And this hunger will set you apart. You will find fewer who can meet you without deception. You will walk more alone, but you will walk as a sovereign. And that is the price of power. So let me strike the question into your mind like iron against an anvil. Would you rather be comforted by illusions or armed with clarity? Would you rather be another name in the endless ledger of repetition, or the man who notices, understands, and rules himself? The theater is not going away. The performances will continue. But only you decide whether you remain an audience member or whether you step behind the curtain and claim the authority of vision. To step behind the curtain is to embrace a reality that most men will never touch because it strips them of the narcotic sweetness of illusion. It is not easy to look at a woman and see not just her beauty, not just her laughter, but the invisible fingerprints of every man who has stood where you stand. It is not easy to admit that what feels unique to you has been rehearsed before, perfected before, deployed before. But this is the essence of Machiavelli's revelation. Power is not for those who crave comfort. Power belongs to those who can endure the brutality of truth without collapsing into despair. And so the man who notices, truly notices, is reborn not as a victim, but as a sovereign. Yet the danger is real. Many men who awaken to this vision turn bitter. They curse women, they curse society, they curse the game itself. But this bitterness is a trap no less dangerous than blindness. For the man who hates is still bound. He is chained to what he condemns, forever orbiting the very illusions he claims to reject. Machiavelli would warn us, hatred is as enslaving as love when it clouds judgment. True sovereignty lies not in rage, but in clarity. To notice is not to despise. To notice is to understand. And in understanding, to choose with freedom. The common man sees women with many men and imagines corruption, decay, something spoiled. He does not realize that what he is truly confronting is not corruption, but skill. A woman with many men has refined her strategies the way a warrior refines his swordsmanship. She knows how to disarm, how to manipulate, how to inspire longing. These are not accidents. They are repetitions that forged mastery. And the untrained man blind to this is cut down by her precision every time. His collapse is inevitable because he insists on imagining innocence where there is only experience. The power response is different. The man who sees this mastery recognizes it for what it is, not purity lost, but competence gained. And once he sees, he cannot be deceived. He does not project fantasies onto her, nor does he condemn her for the strategies she wields. Instead, he evaluates. He asks, do I wish to engage with this performance? Does it serve my sovereignty, or does it threaten it? In this shift, he reclaims the role of chooser. He ceases to be another pawn in her theater and becomes an autonomous actor, capable of stepping onto or off the stage at will. This perception shift is liberation. Once you grasp that appearances are weapons, not truths, you stop treating them as sacred. You stop expecting women to deliver you from loneliness or grant you meaning. Instead, you grant yourself meaning, and you decide what role, if any, another person plays within it. This is not cynicism. It is clarity. And clarity is the essence of freedom. But clarity demands courage. For once you see the patterns, you cannot unsee them. Once you recognize the repetition, you cannot return to the comforting illusion that you were chosen for something mystical. You see yourself not as the hero of her story, but as one of many actors invited to play a part. This knowledge can feel like poison. But Machiavelli would remind us, poison in small doses is also medicine. To swallow the bitterness of truth is to inoculate yourself against the sickness of illusion. And once immune, you move through the world with a strength that no deception can pierce. So I ask you now, what happens when you no longer worship the mask? What happens when you no longer fear the truth of repetition? What happens when you look at the stage and see not a goddess, not a demon, but a strategist whose power lies only in your willingness to believe? The answer is transformation. You become untouchable. You become a man who cannot be undone by the performances that enslave others. You become what Machiavelli called the rarest of rulers, one who sees the world as it is, and not as he wishes it to be. But let us push deeper, for the theater of appearances is not limited to women. It is everywhere. Politics, business, friendships, all governed by the same law of masks. If you cannot pierce appearances in love, you will not pierce them anywhere else. If you cannot govern yourself in desire, you will not govern yourself in ambition. This is why the lesson matters. This is why noticing matters. Because the discipline you forge here radiates outward, shaping every domain of your life. The man who remains blind in romance will remain blind in politics, in business, in brotherhood. But the man who sees in romance learns to see everywhere. So let this be carved into your mind. Noticing is not about women. It is about you. It is about whether you will continue as a slave to illusions, or whether you will rise as a sovereign in a world built on masks. And the question that lingers, like a blade at your throat, is this: if you dare to see clearly, will you have the strength to act accordingly? Or will you, like so many before you, beg to return to the comfort of your chains? If you beg to return to your chains, you will spend your life kneeling before illusions. You will kneel before the smile that is not meant for you alone. You will kneel before the promise that was whispered to others before you. You will kneel before the stage lights, dazzled, convinced that you are chosen, when in truth you are merely another in the endless audience. This is the fate of most men, and it is a fate Machiavelli would call unworthy of one who aspires to sovereignty. For he reminds us that fortune favors the bold, but only if boldness is sharpened by clarity. To be bold without clarity is to rush blindly into traps. To be clear without boldness is to see the path and refuse to walk it. But to unite both clarity and boldness is to wield power. The common man does not unite them. He either hides in blindness or collapses in bitterness. He says all women are corrupt, or he says his woman is different. Both are lies, born from weakness, and both lies collapse under pressure. The bitter man becomes a prisoner of his resentment, incapable of love, incapable of vision. The blind man becomes a prisoner of fantasy, incapable of discernment, incapable of sovereignty. Neither path leads to mastery. Neither path leads to freedom. The power response is the middle way, but it is not soft, it is ruthless. It demands that you see clearly and still act decisively. It demands that you strip away illusions, but not abandon engagement. It demands that you understand the repetition, the strategies, the performances, and still move forward as a sovereign chooser. This man neither despises nor worships. He observes, evaluates, and decides. He takes what serves him, rejects what enslaves him, and walks away when the cost outweighs the benefit. His power lies in his ability to govern himself, while others are governed by appearances. The perception shift that follows is nothing less than a rebirth of masculine identity. Suddenly, the metrics by which you once measured women, purity, innocence, exclusivity, are revealed as childish. You no longer crave to be the only one, the first one, the special one. You crave instead to remain sovereign in your dealings. You no longer need her history to be empty in order for your presence to matter. You need only your vision to remain unclouded. This shift destroys the pedestal and replaces it with the throne. You stop asking to be crowned by another. You crown yourself. And here we touch the final edge of Machiavelli's wisdom. He warned that men are destroyed not by enemies, but by their own illusions. Princes lose their thrones, not because fortune turns against them, but because they believed fortune was their friend. In the same way, men lose their sovereignty in love not because women deceive them, but because they begged to be deceived. They wanted the lie more than they wanted the truth. And so they were conquered. But you, hearing these words now, stand before a different possibility. You can reject the lie. You can endure the bitterness of clarity. And you can transform that bitterness into strength. So what is the edict, the final command carved into stone? It is this: stop asking to be chosen. Choose yourself. Stop demanding innocence from others. Demand clarity from yourself. Stop mistaking appearances for reality. Study appearances, master appearances, and use them as tools rather than prisons. This is the only path to sovereignty. This is the only shield against the repetitions of history. This is the only way to stand as a man who notices. But I will leave you with the most dangerous choice of all. You can take these words and nod, impressed, and return to your blindness tomorrow. Or you can let them burn into your mind until you can never look at a woman or at yourself the same way again. One path leads to comfort and then collapse. The other leads to clarity and then sovereignty. And you know, deep in your bones, which path Machiavelli would demand you take. So ask yourself now, with merciless honesty, will you keep playing the role of the enchanted, blind, and broken? Or will you rise as the man who notices, the man who sees through masks, the man who governs himself as ruthlessly as a prince governs his state? The theater of appearances is eternal. The only question is whether you will live as another spectator or step forward as its master.